You know, Texas is known for a lot of things: cowboys, barbecue, longhorns, and bragging rights. But nothing, and I mean nothing, changed the state more than oil. That thick, black, sticky stuff oozing out of the ground made more fortunes, broke more dreams, and caused more drama than a season of reality TV. This is the twisted history of Texas oil. Let's roll back to the late 1800s, when most folks in Texas were still ranching, farming, or arguing about who made the best chili. Oil wasn't exactly on anyone's mind until some poor souls realized you could dig into the ground and find this strange black liquid that smelled like a mix of rotten eggs and trouble. At first, they used it for kerosene lamps and medicine, because apparently in the 1800s, people thought drinking oil could cure what ailed you. Spoiler alert, it did not. The big moment came in 1901 at Spindletop near Beaumont. Picture it. A ragtag bunch of dreamers and roughnecks drilled a well on a salt dome, hoping they'd get lucky. And oh boy, did they ever. On January 10th, the Lucas gusher erupted, shooting oil 150 feet into the sky and spewing out nearly 100,000 barrels a day. For perspective, that was more oil in one day than the entire U.S. had been producing. It was the geyser that made Texas famous. People said it looked like the earth had sprung a leak in the devil's bathtub. Overnight, Beaumont went from a sleepy backwater to a circus. Farmers, drifters, lawyers, con men, preachers, and ladies of questionable morals all came stampeding in looking to strike it rich. Shacks went up, tent saloons multiplied, and Beaumont suddenly had more whiskey than water. And the oil boom was on. Now, here's where it gets twisted. A lot of folks thought they'd make millions. But for every lucky oil man, there were about 100 broke dreamers who ended up with nothing but blisters and debt. Land prices skyrocketed, fortunes were made overnight, and just as quickly lost. Some people sold mineral rights for a bottle of bourbon, only to find out later they basically traded away a gold mine. That's Texas for you. Big rewards, bigger regrets. Oil fever spread across the state. Suddenly everybody was poking holes in the ground hoping to find the next gusher. Towns like Kilgore, Ranger, and Borger blew up overnight. Ranger, Texas, for example, turned into a mud pit of derricks and saloons, where roughnecks worked all day, fought all night, and sometimes burned the whole place down by accident. Borger was so wild in the 1920s it had murder, gambling, and bootlegging on every corner. So bad that the Texas Rangers had to come in and clean up the town with their six-shooters. Oil made money, but it also made mayhem. And let's not forget about Kilgore during the East Texas oil boom in the 1930s. That little town had the densest concentration of oil derricks in the world. They called it the Forest of Derricks, and people said you could walk across town without ever touching the ground, just by stepping from rig to rig. Imagine living there. The air smelled like crude, the ground shook from drilling, and half the town was a saloon. Twisted, yes, but also pure Texas. The oil boom didn't just make wild towns. It made families rich beyond belief. Ever heard of the Hunt brothers or the H.L. Hunt dynasty? He started off with practically nothing and turned into one of the richest men in America, thanks to oil. But with wealth came feuds, scandals, divorces, and enough family drama to make a soap opera jealous. You can't talk about Texas oil without hearing about fortunes made and lost faster than you can say wildcatter. Of course, the oil industry wasn't just cowboys and chaos. It built modern Texas. Oil money funded skyscrapers in Houston, universities like Rice and Texas AANDM, and football teams like the Dallas Cowboys. Yes, if you're watching football in Texas, you can thank oil for those fancy stadiums and billionaire owners. But it also meant greed, corruption, and the occasional oil baron with a taste for wild parties, gold-plated toilets, and pet tigers. Because if you've got oil money, apparently subtlety is optional. And let's talk about the environment. Early oilmen weren't exactly thinking about climate change. Spills, fires, and waste were just part of the job. Oil gushers sometimes burned for months, and towns would light up the night sky like a giant bonfire. It was messy, it was dangerous, and it was spectacular to watch. People treated blowouts like fireworks shows. "Hey honey, grab the kids, the well's on fire again." By the mid-20th century, oil had cemented Texas as an economic powerhouse. Houston became the oil capital of the world, Dallas strutted with oil millionaires, and Midland, Odessa turned into boom and bust central. In fact, the oil business was so volatile that towns could go from riches to ghost towns depending on the price of crude. One year, you're riding in Cadillacs, the next you're pawning your boots. And of course, the twisted part of the story is that Texas oil didn't just power Texas, it powered the world. World wars, industrial growth, the space race, you name it, Texas crude helped fuel it. And through it all, Texans held on to their oil-soaked pride. You can still spot oil barons at fancy galas and cowboy hats sipping champagne while talking drilling rights. Only in Texas. Today, the oil story continues. Fracking, offshore rigs, and the modern energy boom keep the state rolling in crude, though it comes with controversy about pollution, water use, and whether Texas might one day have to live up to its sunny climate and embrace solar. But don't tell an oil man that. He'll just laugh, light a cigar with a $100 bill, and remind you that black gold still runs through the veins of the Lone Star State. So, when you drive through Texas and see pump jacks bobbing like mechanical grasshoppers, remember this. Every one of those is a little piece of twisted history. Behind each pump is a story of a dreamer, a driller, a drunk, a preacher, or a con artist who thought they'd make it rich. Some did. Most didn't. But together, they made Texas the oil-soaked, larger-than-life place it is today. And that's the twisted history of oil in Texas. Wild, weird, and still pumping strong. Now, if Spindletop was the birth of Texas oil, then Midland and Odessa were where it grew up, got wild, and started buying Ferraris it couldn't really afford. This corner of West Texas, flatland, dust storms, and more jackrabbits than people, turned into the beating, oil-soaked heart of Texas in the 20th century. The first real oil strike in the Permian Basin came in the 1920s, and when it hit, boomtown fever was back. Odessa went from a sleepy railroad stop to a full-blown circus of roughnecks, speculators, and people who thought buying land meant instant millions. It wasn't long before Odessa got a reputation for being rougher than a bar fight on payday. Saloons, gambling dens, and entertainment houses popped up faster than derricks, and sometimes you weren't sure which one was dirtier. Meanwhile, Midland liked to call itself the tall, clean twin of Odessa. Midland was where the oil barons lived in mansions with chandeliers, while Odessa was where the guys who actually did the drilling drank cheap whiskey and started fistfights. Locals used to joke that in Midland you married your sweetheart. In Odessa, you just met her in the alley behind the bar. The oil kept flowing and fortunes rolled in. By the 1950s, Midland was known as the Tall City, and not just because of its skyline. It was the capital of the Permian Basin oil empire, and it had more millionaires per capita than almost anywhere else in the country. You couldn't throw a rock without hitting a Cadillac, or an oilman in a Stetson hat bragging about his wells. Odessa, meanwhile, had more honky-tonks, more roughnecks, and more stories of barroom brawls than any respectable Chamber of Commerce brochure would admit. And of course, the oil business out there was pure boom and bust. One year, folks in Midland were building country clubs, hosting galas, and buying fur coats for their dogs. The next year, when oil prices tanked, they were pawning their belt buckles and leasing out their Cadillacs to tourists. Odessa had it even worse. When the bus hit, it felt like half the town was suddenly unemployed, but the beer still somehow flowed. If you want twisted history, just look at the Permian Basin in the 1980s. The oil bust hit so hard that people called Midland a ghost town with skyscrapers. You'd have billion-dollar office towers with tumbleweeds rolling past them. Odessa, for its part, didn't notice as much. It was already used to being broke. Still, through all the chaos, the Midland-Odessa area kept pumping oil like there was no tomorrow. Politicians like George H.W. Bush even cut their teeth out there as young oilmen before heading off to Washington. And if you ever wonder why Texas politics is so tied to oil, just remember, half those guys learned how to deal while sitting in a Midland country club or an Odessa dive bar. So if Spindletop was the birth of Texas oil, Midland and Odessa were its wild teenage years, full of money, booze, bragging, and a whole lot of bad decisions. And just like teenagers, they never really grew out of it. To this day, the Permian Basin is still one of the richest oil-producing regions in the world. The only thing that changes is whether oilmen are driving brand new Cadillacs or fixing up their old Fords. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this twisted ride through Texas oil history, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Come back next week for more wild stories and Texas-sized adventures. See y'all soon.